History was written by the victors. Remember that quote throughout this video. So, I might have figured out one of the greatest mysteries relating to the Kozuki clan and Wano in general. Also, I might have figured out the origins of a few of the Gorosei members. If you are a regular on my channel, you know for the last few weeks on my stream and in Discord, I've been piecing together a bunch of connections, and I think I landed on something that changes how we view the Void Century and the world government. That being said, this theory is amongst a few others that I have relating to Wano history that might become even more relevant as we move on to the last saga. That being said, this theory is amongst a few other theories that I have relating to Wano history that might become even more relevant as we move on to the last saga. The other theories of mine to watch out for are the Wano Exodus theory and the Void Century video, where I'll show everyone how Oda showed us what the world was like pre-Void Century. So if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Okay, so where do I begin with this? Let's start with Wano. There's so many connections to be made with just Wano itself. Even going to the Onigashima War, we have Sengoku highlighting this point, saying, "It doesn't strike me as coincidental that all of these great figures should have had such close ties to the land of Wano." And earlier on, he says, "You won't anticipate the future if you don't know your history." And that is exactly why I think for us to predict this last saga, we have to figure out why Wano is so important. See, there's two important times that give us some context of Wano's past. One interesting one is that it seems that at some point Wano was an open nation to the rest of the world, and possibly even could have been in some part affiliated with the world government. I say that knowing that doesn't sound right in the moment, but I'll explain in a little bit. That being said, we know that at some point in history, Ryuma fought and defended Wano so heroically he was dubbed the God of the Blade, and his sword Shusui became a national treasure protecting Wano. So was Wano open at that time? But also we know from Oden that the Kozuki clan was the one that closed off the borders officially as well, which brings us a lot of questions about how and why specifically the Kozuki was the clan that closed the borders. The way it was worded, it almost seems like the Kozuki enforced this against the wishes of others, which brings us a big question to who that other group was that might have wanted Wano open originally. So then that brings us to another interesting point. We know the Kozuki clan during the Ancient War was on the side of the Ancient Kingdom, which was against the world government, and we know this because of the existence of the poneglyphs. The poneglyphs were made by the Kozuki, and on top of that, the glyphs inscribed on the stone are a Kozuki exclusive text, meaning amongst the clans on Wano, only the Kozuki know it. And we also know that it seems like the poneglyphs were given to what were probably prominent allies of the Kozuki clan. So we know that there was poneglyphs in places like Alabasta, Skypiea, Fishman Island, and on Zunisha. The situation with Zunisha can provide us a lot of context. See, from the latest chapter 1052, it's now nearly completely established that Zunisha is a key component towards opening up Wano. On top of that, something that I found to be an interesting detail is that we know the Minks have relations to Wano, but it's not all of Wano. Every time it's specifically emphasized that it was the Kozuki clan that were considered brothers of the Minks tribe. So that makes me think maybe this is the same case with all the other locations of the poneglyphs. Fishman Island housing the ancient weapon Poseidon, Alabasta possibly having an ancient weapon Pluton, but also having a mysterious relationship with the world government. But I think the Shandoran connection with Wano is the most interesting, since they had a bell named the Light of Shandora, and they also had shrines for what seemed to be the sun god Nika. But I'll get more into that in a future video relating to the Void Century. The other interesting part was that Wano was known as the Land of Gold, whereas Shandora had El Dorado, the City of Gold, with a poneglyph, which probably tied them to the Kozuki clan as well. Maybe Shandora had the ancient weapon Uranus. If we are following the trend, maybe it was the knock upstream, and they just forgot? And continuing that idea, maybe Nika or Joy Boy was from Wano originally, which I'll get into that idea in another video. None of this, by the way, is what I actually wanted to talk about. The reason I brought this up was to highlight when we are talking about Wano in all of these instances, it seems like it was the Kozuki clan rather than Wano as a whole that was an ally to all of these other locations. But that's really interesting because we know that the Kozuki clan wasn't the only prominent clan in Wano during the Void Century. The Amatsuki clan was also the only other named clan we know of that existed in the Void Century. We know this because of Toki's existence. She was originally Amatsuki Toki before marrying Kozuki Oden, which which I think was just destiny that she met him, but you'll understand that in a second. Now, see, the interesting thing about Toki is her introduction. We know she is of Wano heritage from the Void Century, but she herself had never been to Wano. She, in fact, from what we know, was time jumping throughout the past 800 years trying to get to Wano, and was only successful after meeting Oden. All she knew was that she was certain that her parents were from Wano, but that means the Amatsuki clan was not on Wano despite being from Wano. So if the Amatsuki clan was off of Wano during the Void Century during the war, how come we haven't seen their influence anywhere outside of Wano? And so here's another interesting detail. We are in Wano right now, and besides Momo and Hiyori, who technically have Amatsuki blood, how come there are no other Amatsuki clan members? We do know that when Sukiyaki was born, according to Higurashi, there was an Amatsuki daimyo. So then what happened to the Amatsuki clan? Were they wiped out by the Kurozumi clan? Or is there another reason why they were so scarce in Wano? If there were really a family from the Void Century like the Kozuki, then why aren't they held in an equally high regard? To the point where we don't even know which region of Wano was Amatsuki's. I mean, I might have figured it out, but that will be in the next video. But okay, so now let me start connecting the dots and answering some questions. Isn't it weird that the poneglyphs are specifically Kozuki text rather than a Wano text? Doesn't that kind of imply that the Amatsuki can't read the text despite being from the same time period? So then let me ask you another thing. Isn't it also weird that the Ming tribe were said to be brothers of the Kozuki clan and not of Wano in general? Isn't it weird that Toki, who is Amatsuki, has no idea about Wano, where it is, or what her connection is besides that her parents were from there? It almost sounds like the Amatsuki and Kozuki were not allies during the Void Century. And then that's where this thought comes to mind. You know how Dressrosa and Alabasta were countries associated with creating the world government? When that happened, the royal families had a choice to leave the lower realm to go to the upper realm, the realm of the gods, or celestial dragons. The Don Quixote family left and became celestials. The Nefertiti family did not and remained on Alabasta. And interestingly, were given a poneglyph too by the Kozuki, which shows some sort of dual nature of that country. But going back to this point, it feels like to me that the Amatsuki clan was probably the royal family that left Wano to become celestial dragons, meaning the Amatsuki clan was part of the creation of the world government. I know, that sounds crazy, but hear me out. That explains why the Kozuki created a glyph system exclusive to their clan. It was so that the Amatsuki could not read it. If the Amatsuki clan left to become celestials, then that also explains why there aren't many of them on Wano. It also explains why Toki was not on Wano and had no idea where it was. It was because her family was either in the Holy Land or a world government base. It also explains why the Minks are not the brothers or allies of all of Wano, but specifically the Kozuki clan. Also, the name Amatsuki means heaven moon, and heaven is often associated with the gods, which would be the celestial dragons here. So all of this implying that there was some kind of civil war between the Kozuki and the Amatsuki, which after the Amatsuki left is why the Kozuki closed off the borders. See, there was an interesting panel from chapter 919 where the children of modern Wano under Orochi's reign were being indoctrinated by propaganda-based education, and the kids were asked why Wano has a closed nation policy and why it was good. So when asked about an open nation policy, there was one of the kids that said it's a very bad thing where you let in people and ideas that are harmful to the nation. I feel like that might have been what happened with Wano at the very start. Some external influence came and influenced the Amatsuki in a way that harmed Wano and encouraged them to leave and become celestials. So okay, if the Amatsuki actually left Wano to join the world government, then surely there would be proof of that on the other side. And I'm here to say that at this point, the proof is kind of irrefutable. So we know in One Piece, Wano is the One Piece equivalent of Japan, to the point that Wano is what Japan used to be called, referring to the land of harmony, which I bring up in a future video relating to why I said Joy Boy Nico is heavily tied to Wano's creation. But so that being said, when we see Japanese aesthetics within the show, they usually have relevance to Wano. For example, Toki's attire when she was shown was almost immediately understood to be specific to Wano. There are several locations outside of Wano that take inspiration from other nations, like the Beer Kingdom has Russian influence, several nations in the world government have real world nation connections, there's other nations and entities that are heavily European influence. Dressrosa had heavy Latin connections from Viola and Diamante to Senior Pink. Another interesting note is that the naming scheme for the ancient weapons and devil fruit classifications all have ties to the Greek language and mythology. And so all that being said, with that perspective, a place outside of Wano with heavy Japanese aesthetics would almost certainly be associated with Wano. And when I took a step back, I realized the Navy headquarters, Marineford, is actually the best example of a place outside of Wano with heavy ties to Wano. For starters, the island is shaped like the crescent moon. On top of that, the actual castle is a Japanese-styled castle. It looks like a modern version of Oden's castle in Curry, for example. Then when we look at the internal aesthetics of it, even the traditions of how the Marines meet, it's all Japanese. And then here's another interesting point. So we know the world government took over after the Void Century. During that time was when the ancient weapons, presumably of the ancient kingdom, were active. When there are things like the ancient weapons, there must have been counters to this power system. And that's where an idea came to me. See, Luffy has been referred to as a guardian deity, and Joy Boy and Nika might have been from Wano, but there's several clues I have that led me to believe that the guardian deities might have originated on Wano, and that was their greatest powers to contribute to the war. And now we know that despite all of those great powers present, the world government was still declared the victors. We know that according to Doflamingo, they have some sort of special treasure that is really powerful that can shake the world, but something else I realized was that the world government probably created the admiral system back at the end of the Void Century. And that's supported by the fact that the admirals are considered the Navy's strongest weapons, and the admirals also have a naming scheme. See, the admirals are commonly referred to by their admiral names, which are Akainu, Aokiji, Kizaru, Fujitora, and Ryokugu. And even the future candidates follow this naming scheme, giving them a Japanese name for an animal and a color to give them their titles. Their real names are Sakazuki, Kuzan, Borsalino, Isho, and we don't know Green Bull's real name. But isn't it curious as to why the world government uses a Japanese naming structure for their weapon system? On top of everything else, that makes the Navy's structure extremely questionable given all their other connections. And I didn't even mention the poneglyph that we found in Impel Down in that video I posted a few weeks ago. And this isn't even all the evidence that I have. Okay, so this one is probably the most interesting one. It makes me think a lot and even felt stronger once chapter 1052 released. So remember how Oda personified Zoro's swords? At the time, Zoro's swords being the Wado Ichimonji, Sandai Kitetsu, and the Shusui. And what we learned was Oda showed us that the Wado Ichimonji personified looks like a young Kozuburo, who was the person who forged the sword. So that gives us an interesting clue to who possibly created these other weapons and what they look like. Now remember how I said we know that there was an Amatsuki daimyo when Sukiyaki was born? This was the silhouette we were shown. Doesn't the Amatsuki daimyo kind of match the image of the personified Kitetsu? And what's interesting here is that we don't know the name of who created the Kitetsu line of swords, but it might be that Kitetsus were created by the Amatsuki clan, or the Kitetsu family was a part of the Amatsuki clan. Which brings me to the last connection for the Amatsuki family. See, we have seen the Sandai and the Nidai Kitetsu, but we're still waiting to see the Shodai Kitetsu. And so far on Wano, we have not seen it. But the most popular theory is that this Gorosei member has the Shodai Kitetsu. And you know what I think? I think that's right, and even more than that, this guy is probably the creator of the Kitetsu, and beyond that, he is probably an Amatsuki member, if not an original member of the Amatsuki clan. If we think the Gorosei have extended lifespans, this could make sense. And what's even funnier, if you cut off the top knot, we could actually match him with the silhouette of the Amatsuki daimyo. And I'm not sure about this part, but if he were an original member of the Amatsuki clan, then it might be that he could be like Toki's dad and Momo's grandfather, which would be crazy. And that brings us to two interesting points about Toki. If the Amatsuki were celestial dragons, then that means Toki is as well. And something that I want to emphasize is that her fruit seems really important. And it might be that the devil fruits were given to the original celestial dragons. But in general, the world government seems to have some kind of interesting access to devil fruits. Somehow all the admirals have world-breaking powers, but the celestial dragons seem to even use the fruits as a pastime game with their human property, as we saw with Boa Hancock. So what might have happened with Toki is that she might have stolen her devil fruit and used it to escape the Holy Land. She might have witnessed the atrocities of the Celestials or for some reason wanted to escape and reach Wano. There must have been a reason for her to be on her journey and seeking the specific day when Wano opens up, which ultimately led her to Oden. And so there are a few more interesting points about this. So another reason the Gorosei guy is probably Amatsuki is because of the knowledge he has about Wano, and it's shown in chapter 1052. His line made it seem like he knew exactly how to open up Wano. It seems like he knew Zunisho was a key to opening up Wano, and made me even more feel like he was a person tying to the lore of Wano. But another point is that if this theory is true, that the Amatsuki clan was the royal family that left Wano to become celestial dragons, that would make Momo and Hiyori celestials as well. But also this theory would imply that there was a civil war between the Kozuki and Amatsuki to some extent, given that the Kozuki felt the need to make an exclusive writing system, which would mean that Momo and Hiyori are mixed clans of probably two warring sides of the Void Century era Wano. And now to bring in some other points to this theory that help set up for what I will be talking about in future videos, but pertain to the last saga as a whole. Right now, given that we are seemingly wrapping up on Wano, while not answering many questions of Wano's past, for example, the importance of Wano hinted at by Big Mom's monologue as she fell from Onigashima, questioning whether part of the One Piece being in Wano. Which is ironic that something like the One Piece could be separated out into different pieces in the first place. But that being said, the last saga with the world government might reveal that Wano is way more connected to the creation of the world government's creation, and all of the questions we have about Wano will be answered through the backstory of the world government, which is what I want to talk about a little bit really quickly. See, this theory about the Amatsuki being part of the original 20 families creating the world government can be rooted by the fact that this Gorosei member is probably Amatsuki and the Navy has a lot of Wano-esque details. But the biggest clue might be that there might have been a civil war between the Kozuki and Amatsuki based off of the Kozuki exclusive glyphs. And that civil war might have been the reason why the Amatsuki ended up allying with something like the world government, and similarly the Kozuki with the ancient kingdom, which implies that maybe we can see this trend with some other key nations, specifically one with poneglyphs, and that's where we get to an interesting place. So when you look at the Gorosei members, I noticed one other thing. Some of these members have extremely long legs, which some of them kind of look like Baron Tamago, for example. But that's important because in the story, prior to the Void Century, one of the most significant events listed on various world timelines of One Piece is the 1,000-year war between the long leg and long arm tribes. But going back to the main point, if there was a 1,000-year war and it ended with the Void Century, then that might mean these two tribes were on opposing sides of the war as well. And some of these Gorosei members can probably indicate to us that the Long Leg tribe was one that joined the world government. Which is why we see the Long Arm tribe seems to be suffering, as we can see with Brook's time skip location. What's interesting is that the Long Arm Kingdom, like many of the other examples like Skypiea, Zou, Fishman Island, is another reclused island. While Brook is there, we are seeing them say he, Brook, only has one joint in his arm. Is there a stranger creature in the entire world? Implying that they do not interact with most of the world, which is what we see of most of the proposed allies of the Kozuki and the Ancient Kingdom. Also, one other really random detail, Long Arm Kingdom is located on Sword Mountain Island. I mean, if we're connecting allies to Wano, that's a pretty big thing, especially given that they were the ones who forged Brook's sword, Soul Solid. Which brings me to another very important point. I think that the time skip had various purposes. For Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro, we have an understanding that the people that they met were the important parts of why they were sent where they were. My current wildcard is Usopp, and I'll try to figure out the meaning of his location later, but I think for Frankie, Chopper, Robin, Nami, and Brook, we were subtly introduced to various things related to the Void Century. And I won't talk about Frankie in this video, but his time skip story is crucial to my Void Century video coming up. But the people that I want to focus on are Robin, Nami, and Brook. For Brook, we just discussed the importance. We were introduced to the Long Arm tribe, which is probably on the side of the Ancient Kingdom. Robin went to Tequila Wolf, a bridge being built as a result of the Void Century for an unknown reason. Then there is Nami, who on the surface, it's a little confusing how her location connects besides the weather aspect, but what we learn is that the old guy who taught her the weather stuff, Oda confirmed randomly in Vivre cards that he is a Birkin, which is very interesting. Because that brings us to another known War of the Void century. So we know El Dorado was the city of gold where the poneglyph was located, and its residents were the Shandorans, who are probably on the side of the Kozuki since they had the poneglyph. Also, they were the ones who fell to the 20 kingdoms. And what's interesting is that there are two other winged races that came down in the lore, and it could have been that Burka or the Skypian races were involved with the world government. It could have been the Burkans that was the winged race that joined the Celestials, which would explain Enel having a god complex like Doflamingo. Or it could have been Skypian for one main reason, and I believe Marshall D. Preach has a video on this topic, but he used a very different logic line to get to this point. But the main thing being that Gonfall and this Gorosei member look awfully similar, and so maybe the Gorosei member was Skypian. They joined the world government, which is why they were given land in the sky. Either way, also this provides us with an example of how apparently you can be of these races but not have wings, as Enel and Gonfall don't have wings it seems. But I do like that through separate methods, there's another theory that links those two people, which makes it feel like this theory is naturally stronger. And I haven't even gone to talk about how Vivi plays into all of this with their connections. Given that we know that the Nefertiti family technically would be Celestials, but they also have a poneglyph entrusted to them, and they were supposedly housing Pluton there. We also get the idea that there is nothing actually special about the Celestials, since the Nefertiti family is just normal people, and the only thing that separates them from godhood was a choice made 800 years ago. Which brings us to the concluding topic. History is written by the victors. This line, though not always true, is kind of impactful, and I think a lot of us understand it, that whoever wins a war typically has the power to dictate what the history is. We see that understood in Ohara when Clover said that the world government being the victors was able to mask and hide the true history of the Void Century. On top of that, we see that in Wano with the parallel in chapter 919 and 1052, where we see how differently history is taught based on who wins the war. What's interesting about all of this though is that the world government was the victors, and instead of writing a history, they left the Void Century blank. And instead of them, the Kozuki clan, who are presumably the losers of whatever large war was back then, were the ones to be able to write down the history in a way that could not be destroyed or tampered with, which lends itself to the idea that the Kozuki are the true winners because their history was managed to not be smothered out. But as Doflamingo says, justice will prevail. Of course it will, because the side of justice will be whichever side wins. And we see that on Wano when Orochi was shogun. The way Oden and the Kozuki were being depicted was not too different than how the world government depicts the D-clan. So let me know what you guys think. I think it makes a lot of sense if the Amatsuki or the Heaven Moon clan became celestial dragons who abandoned Wano, explaining Toki's positioning off of Wano, but also the heavy ties to Wano culture that the world government has. This also would answer the question Sengoku had about why so many important figures constantly revolve around Wano. This theory also provides an inkling of an idea for the identity to the most unique member of the Gorosei, as well as establishes a line of logic that might help us establish the identity of the other Gorosei members. All of this giving us a better idea of who the D-clan could have been and who the world government was and how they became established in the first place. In the next videos, I will be continuing off of this point and talking more about modern Wano, but I will also have a video that explains a major event that might have happened during the Void Century. As I discussed earlier, you can't anticipate the future without learning about the past, which is exactly what we do every weekend on my Voice of All Things streams. Join my Discord or follow me on Twitter for updates regarding when I go live. In those streams, I've been talking about a lot of my future theories and piecing them together live with chat, and I've been having a lot of fun with those. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe. I have a lot more in store. I can't wait to connect Greenville to Wano in the near future. Also, heads up, I will start having member exclusive content on my channel very soon. Usually they will be an early rough draft release of content that I will drop later on, so if you want to hear my thoughts as early as possible, support me through Patreon or YouTube, and you will essentially get ParVisions leaked on my channel. Also, keep an eye out for all the collabs that I have planned in the break month. If there were ever a time to get your friends onto a theory channel, it would be now. So make sure to have everyone you know binge my theories, because all of my theories are connected and give you a whole new perspective of One Piece. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.